The story begins on a first-class flight, where passengers are settling in. Among them is a businessman, well-dressed, confident, and clearly used to special treatment. He takes his seat, scanning the cabin with an air of superiority. Nearby, a man sits quietly, dressed in simple clothes, keeping to himself. The businessman notices him, and something about the man's relaxed, unbothered demeanor irritates him. He assumes this guy doesn't belong in first class. Maybe he got upgraded by mistake, maybe he's just lucky. Either way, the businessman feels the need to say something. At first, it's subtle, sarcastic remarks about how airlines let just anyone fly first class these days. He looks around, expecting others to share his amusement. But the quiet man doesn't react, doesn't argue. Instead, he simply offers a small, polite smile. This only makes the businessman more irritated. He leans in, making sharper comments, asking if the guy even knows how expensive these seats are. Again, no reaction. Other passengers are starting to notice, sensing the tension. But the businessman keeps going, convinced that he's putting an outsider in his place. Then, without warning, a flight attendant approaches, addressing the quiet man with a warm smile. "Mr. Reeves, can I get you anything else?" The businessman freezes. His face changes as realization hits. The stranger he had been mocking this whole time wasn't just some random guy. He was Keanu Reeves. The whispers start. Other passengers begin to recognize him. Some pull out their phones, nudging each other in disbelief. Meanwhile, the businessman is suddenly quiet, awkwardly shifting in his seat, trying to act like nothing happened. As the flight goes on, the businessman tries to backtrack, making small talk, pretending he hadn't just been rude. But it's too late. The damage is done. Others in the cabin are throwing him glances, smirking at his embarrassment. A fellow passenger even calls him out, shaking their head at his arrogance. And Keanu? He remains as calm as ever, unfazed, offering a few kind words that only make the businessman feel smaller. The moment serves as a reminder, one the businessman won't forget anytime soon. You never know who you're sitting next to. And sometimes, life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. The first-class cabin is everything you'd expect: wide, comfortable seats, soft lighting, and a quiet hum of conversation. Passengers are settling in, some scrolling through their phones, others ordering drinks from the flight attendants moving gracefully down the aisle. The scent of fresh coffee and warm towels lingers in the air. It's the kind of setting where people expect a smooth, luxurious experience, free from the usual hassle of flying. Among the passengers is a businessman, mid-40s, sharp-dressed, and carrying himself like he owns the place. His suit is expensive, his watch even more so, and he has the attitude to match. He barely acknowledges the flight attendant when she hands him a drink, too busy tapping away on his phone. When another passenger accidentally bumps his seat while putting away luggage, he sighs loudly, shooting an annoyed glance. Everything about him screams entitlement. A few seats away, another man sits quietly. No designer clothes, no flashy accessories, just jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a relaxed posture. He seems comfortable, but doesn't demand attention. At one point, an elderly woman struggles to lift her bag into the overhead bin. Before a flight attendant can step in, the casually dressed man stands up and helps her, offering a kind smile before returning to his seat. He pulls out a book, flipping through the pages like he's in no rush. The difference between the two men is obvious. One treats the cabin like his personal space, expecting the world to cater to him. The other blends in, showing kindness without expecting anything in return. But for now, no one pays much attention. It's just another flight, another group of strangers sharing the same space. No one realizes that this quiet, unassuming man is actually one of the most beloved actors in the world. And the businessman? He's about to learn a lesson he won't forget. As the plane prepares for takeoff, the businessman finally takes notice of the man sitting a few seats away. He glances at Keanu, eyes narrowing slightly as if something doesn't add up. The expensive leather seats, the exclusive service, the well-dressed crowd, it all fits the image of first class. But this guy? Jeans, a plain t-shirt, reading a book like he's in his own little world? The businessman can't help but think there's been a mistake. He waves over a flight attendant with an impatient flick of his wrist. When she leans in, he lowers his voice just enough for others to hear. "Are we upgrading economy passengers now?" he asks, half joking but not really. "I mean, I paid good money for this seat. Shouldn't there be some standards?" He gestures slightly toward Keanu, making it clear who he's talking about. The flight attendant, keeping her professionalism, simply replies, "Sir, all passengers in first class have booked their seats." She gives a polite but firm smile before walking away. But the businessman isn't satisfied. He scoffs, shaking his head and mutters under his breath, "Unbelievable." Keanu, of course, hears everything. But instead of reacting, he just turns the page of his book, completely unbothered. His silence seems to annoy the businessman even more. He leans over slightly, a smug grin forming on his face. "Did you win the lottery or something?" he says, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or maybe you just have really good friends in high places?" He chuckles, clearly expecting a reaction. Keanu finally looks up, but instead of arguing, he simply smiles and shakes his head. "Just here to enjoy the flight, same as you," he says, his tone calm and unshaken. But the businessman isn't done. "Must be nice," he says, eyeing Keanu's outfit like it's offensive to him. "You'd think if someone could afford first class, they'd at least try to look the part." A few nearby passengers glance over, sensing the tension. Some look uncomfortable, while others seem curious to see where this is going. Yet Keanu still doesn't take the bait. He just nods, slightly, and goes back to his book as if none of this is worth his energy. But that only makes the businessman more irritated. He wanted a reaction. He wanted the guy to feel out of place, to second-guess himself. Instead, he's being ignored, and somehow, that's worse. At this point, a few people are whispering. Some recognize Keanu, though they haven't said anything yet. Others just sense that something feels off. The businessman, however, still has no clue who he's talking to, and he's about to push things even further. The businessman, still convinced that he's the most important person in the room, glances around, looking for backup. Surely someone else must feel the same way, right? He clears his throat dramatically and leans slightly toward the man seated across the aisle. "Crazy, isn't it?" he says, shaking his head. "You spend all this money on a first-class ticket, expecting a certain level of class, and then they just let anyone waltz in." His voice is loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. The other man, clearly uncomfortable, forces a tight smile and looks away, pretending to check his phone. The businessman smirks, thinking he's struck a chord. Emboldened, he keeps going. "I mean, I'm not trying to be rude," he says, loud enough for Keanu to hear. "But there's a reason people pay a premium for this experience. It's supposed to be, exclusive." He glances at Keanu's worn-out sneakers and book, shaking his head slightly. "Guess standards aren't what they used to be." Keanu, still calm, closes his book gently and looks up, offering the businessman a small, almost amused smile. "It's a nice flight," he says simply, not giving in to the tension. But that only irritates the businessman more. He was expecting embarrassment, maybe even an apology. Instead, this guy is treating him like an annoying background noise. "Sure," the businessman scoffs, crossing his arms. "Nice flight, just not what I expected from first class." At that moment, a flight attendant approaches, sensing the growing tension. She offers a professional but firm smile. "Sir," she says, addressing the businessman, "is everything all right?" "Oh, everything's fine," he says with fake politeness, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "I was just making an observation. Seems like first class isn't what it used to be, that's all." The flight attendant, picking up on his tone, glances at Keanu, who remains relaxed. "All passengers in this cabin are here because they belong here," she says gently. "If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know." The businessman sighs dramatically. "Nah, it's fine. Just a little surprise, that's all." He mutters something under his breath but leans back in his seat, at least for now. Meanwhile, across the aisle, a woman suddenly perks up, eyes widening slightly. She nudges her husband, whispering something, and he looks over too. Then another passenger takes a second glance at Keanu, their expressions shifting. Recognition is spreading, but Keanu, noticing this, gives them a small shake of the head, almost like he's asking them to stay quiet. He wants to see how far this will go. The businessman is still going, still convinced he's the smartest, most important person in the room. He leans back, shaking his head with a smug grin. "I mean, I get it," he says, speaking loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Not everyone can afford this kind of comfort, so when they finally do, they don't really know how to fit in." He chuckles, looking at Keanu like he's some lost tourist, probably saved up for years just to sit here once. Keanu doesn't react. He simply offers a small, polite nod as if he's heard it all before. He picks up his book again, flipping a page calmly. The businessman scoffs, rolling his eyes. "Unbelievable," he mutters under his breath. Then out of nowhere, the flight attendant returns holding a fresh glass. She smiles warmly as she sets it down on the tray in front of Keanu. "Would you like another drink, Mr. Reeves?" Silence. Absolute silence. The businessman's smirk vanishes instantly. His face goes stiff, his eyes widening ever so slightly. Around the cabin, passengers suddenly sit up a little straighter. A couple of people glance at each other, eyebrows raised. A whisper ripples through the air. "Wait, did she just say Reeves?" The businessman swallows, his throat dry. He stares at Keanu, his brain racing, trying to process what just happened. No way, this can't be real. But then, it hits him all at once. The messy hair, the casual outfit, the quiet, humble attitude, the fact that Keanu never reacted to his insults, never felt the need to prove anything. It was him. The whole time. The businessman lets out a nervous laugh, trying to play it off. "Oh wow," he says, shifting in his seat. That's funny, I didn't even realize." His tone is forced, awkward. Keanu simply nods, offering a small, understanding smile. "No worries," he says, like none of it even bothered him, like he's used to this. But the other passengers aren't letting it slide. One man a few rows down shakes his head, chuckling. "Unbelievable," he mutters. "Spent the whole flight acting like he owns the place, and he didn't even recognize Keanu Reeves sitting right next to him." A woman nearby smirks. "Yeah, kind of embarrassing," she says, loud enough for the businessman to hear. The businessman's face turns red. He sinks into his seat, suddenly wishing he could disappear. All that arrogance, all those insults, completely meaningless now. Because, at the end of the day, the man he mocked had nothing to prove. Keanu, as always, remains humble. He simply picks up his book again, turning the page like nothing ever happened. The businessman shifts uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper around him. Just moments ago, he was the loudest person in the room, full of arrogance and entitlement. Now he feels smaller than ever. His usual confidence is gone, replaced by a deep, sinking embarrassment. He stares straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Keanu. A few rows away, a man leans over to his friend and mutters, just loud enough to be heard, "Guess money doesn't buy class." A soft chuckle follows. The businessman clenches his jaw but says nothing. The flight attendant returns, and this time there's a slight shift in her demeanor. She's still professional, but there's a certain warmth in her voice when she addresses Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, let me know if there's anything else I can get you," she says, smiling. The businessman notices that she doesn't extend the same courtesy to him. It stings. He swallows his pride, knowing he has to say something. His voice is quieter now, less sure of itself. "Hey, listen," he starts, finally turning toward Keanu. His hands fidget slightly, something they never do. "I didn't mean to, be rude, just didn't realize who you were." Keanu closes his book and looks at him, his expression calm as ever. He lets the silence hang for a second before speaking, his words simple yet meaningful. "You never know who you're sitting next to," he says. "Kindness costs nothing." The businessman nods, forcing a weak smile, but he feels the weight. of those words. It's not about who Keanu is, it never was. It's about how he treated someone just because of an assumption. And now, sitting in his expensive first-class seat, he realizes that no amount of money can buy the kind of respect Keanu commands with just his character. Keanu offers him a small nod before returning to his book, as if the whole thing was just another passing moment in his day. But for the businessman, it's a moment he won't forget anytime soon. As the flight continues, the atmosphere slowly settles, but the lesson lingers. The businessman remains quiet, lost in thought. He came onto this plane thinking status and wealth made him important, but in just a few moments he was reminded that true character isn't measured by money or appearance. It's in how you treat others. Keanu never needed to prove anything. His humility and kindness spoke for themselves. This story is a perfect example of why people admire Keanu Reeves. He doesn't demand respect. He earns it simply by being himself. While the businessman tried to belittle him, Keanu never stooped to his level. Instead, he let the truth reveal itself, and in the end, it was the businessman who was left feeling small. It's a reminder for all of us. You never know who you're talking to, and more importantly, you never know what someone has been through.